Hello guys. Today we are talking about some countries that belongs to the global south and global north. First, we are talking about are the countries that belong to the global south. First is the country Saint Barthélemy. Saint Barthélemy, a French-speaking Caribbean island commonly known as Estibats, is known for its white sand beaches and designer shops. The capital, Gustavia, encircling a yacht-filled harbor, has high-end restaurants and historical attractions like the Wallhouse, whose exhibits highlight the island's Swedish colonial era. St. Bart's has long been considered a playground of the rich and famous, and is known for its beautiful pristine beaches, gourmet dining in chic restaurants, and high-end designer shopping. Kind of government. St. Barthélemy is a French overseas collectivity, or an island under French sovereignty outside mainland France. The process of governing in St. Barthélemy is dependent territory. Dependent territory is a territory that does not possess full political independence or sovereignty as a sovereign state, yet remains politically outside the controlling state's integral area. Economic policies. The economy of St. Barthélemy is based upon high-end tourism and duty-free luxury commerce, serving visitors primarily from North America. Duty-free goods are goods bought in special shops on which you do not pay government tax. Fiscal policies. Taxation in St. Barthélemy focuses on two main taxes: registration fees and real estate appreciation tax. Registration fees are payable upon acquisition of the property. All sales of property or real estate rights are subject to the registration fee. Regarding the acquisition of real estate, whether built or not, its amount is 5% of the declared value. All rights and fees, notary registrations, land registration, etc., are between 6 and 7%, depending on the nature and amount of the transaction. Land to be built, villa built. There are certain separate rates applicable to business transfers, for example, or other specific transactions. The notary is in charge of calculating and collecting this tax when drafting the authentic purchasing deed. The real estate appreciation tax consists of 35 when the sale takes place before the 8th year of ownership. Beyond that, the rate is reduced to 20%. A 10% reduction for each year of detention beyond the 8th is applicable. 20% if the property sold has been the principal residence of the transferor for more than 5 years. A reduction of 20% for each year of detention beyond the 8th is applicable. The main tax is payable in St. Barthélemy. City tax. It is applicable to persons accommodated for payment who stay in the territory of the collectivity. The rate of the city tax is 5%. It is applicable on the amount of the rental, hotel night. Annual fixed contribution of company's CFA. Any legal person is subject to the CFA regulations. Its amount is payable annually and comprises a fixed part of 400.0 euros plus a variable amount of 50.0 euros per employee. Commercial import duty. All goods entering the territory of the island of St. Barthélemy are subject to payment of a tax equal to 5% of the value of the goods aid for motor vehicles and 30% for some heavy goods vehicles. Next is Cuba. Cuba, country of the West Indies, the largest single island of the archipelago, and one of the more influential states of the Caribbean region. Cuba is the largest island in the Caribbean Sea. Cuba and its neighbors form the Greater Antilles, a chain of islands created millions of years ago when two of Earth's tectonic plates collided. Cuba is a long and narrow island. It stretches 750 miles 1.20 kilometers from east to west, but is only 60 miles 10 kilometers wide in most places. Kind of government. Cuba has had a democratic centralist political system embodied in the one-state, one-party principle since 1959. Constitutionally, Cuba is a socialist country ruled by the dictates of Marxism. Economic policies. Cuba has a planned socialist economy. Planned socialism was the economic system of the Soviet Union. The Soviet bloc countries like East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Planned socialism was the economic system of Maoist China. For 3 decades after World War II, about a third of the world's population lived under the planned socialist economic system. Today, only Cuba and North Korea remain. Planned socialism and capitalism differ along 4 distinct dimensions: ownership and control of resources, the structure of decision-making and information, the incentives that motivate economic behavior, and the mechanism that coordinates the decisions of economic actors. Fiscal policies. In 2020, Fiscal policymakers adopted a counter-cyclical approach for dealing with the pandemic in what was already a recessionary economic environment. Expenditures associated with the monetary reorganization effort, such as increases in government wages and pensions, had an impact on public finances. In December 2020, total government revenues plunged by 20.1% in real terms as a result of decreases in both tax and non-tax revenues, which were down by 20.6% and 18.6%, respectively. Meanwhile, total expenditure fell by 3.1% as current spending declined by 1.5% and capital expenditures and transfer. Our last Global South country is Panama. Kind of government. Today, Panama is a constitutional representative democracy. The executive, legislative, and judicial branches make up the three parts of the government. An elected president, who is also the head of the government, oversees the executive branch. Economic policies. General policy framework. General policy framework which talks that the well-developed services sector, which contributes 70% of Panama's GDP, is the foundation of the country's economy GDP. Exchange rate policies. The Balboa. The national currency of Panama is tied 1-to-1 to the dollar. The Balboa only has coins in circulation. All of the paper money in use is ours money. Structural policies. The government of Panama is committed to trade liberalization and reduction of structural economic distortions and has published an ambitious national economic plan, whose centerpiece includes accession to the WTO. Debt management policies. Panama completed its Brady Plan rescheduling of private debt in June 1996. The rescheduling allowed the state telecom Intel to return to the market with a conservative $28 million package underwritten by Citibank. Export subsidies policies. Any business is free to import raw materials or semi-processed items under the universalization law for use in domestic manufacture or consumption, or duty-free for export manufacturing. Fiscal policy. Series of tax measures of central government to address economic impacts of health crisis, example of which are debts, income taxes, taxes of dividends and transfer of goods and services. Financial and credit policies. Budget portfolios from different sectors have been released to monitor budget activities of the government of Panama. Now, let us talk about the Global North. First Global North country is Israel. Israel is a parliamentary democracy with multiple parties. Its declaration of independence referred to Israel as a Jewish state. The legislative, executive, and judicial branches make up Israel's parliamentary democracy. Its institutions include the state controller, the Knesset parliament, the government cabinet, and the presidency. Economic policies. The COVID-19 epidemic has dominated economic policy in recent months, and it has significantly diverged before and after the election of a new administration in June 2021. The previous administration put in place a number of short-term programs to aid people and businesses to make up for the lockdown policy's detrimental effects on economic activity. Major economic policies. Streamlining government operations, upgrading public services, boosting economic competitiveness, cutting regulations to support public and private sector growth, limiting Israel's shadow economy, boosting transportation, housing, energy and technology infrastructure. Fiscal policy. The government's plan to reduce the tax rates on both personal income and corporate earnings is evaluated. Additionally, a number of options for increasing revenue on other fronts are recommended. Primary civilian spending is currently relatively modest when compared to other countries. There is less room for savings, and many of the forthcoming structural reforms will likely require initial financial investments. Foreign policy. Israel's strategic location in the Middle East, the larger Arab-Israeli conflict, the struggle with Iran specifically about its nuclear program, as well as the opposition by regional powers, all have a significant impact on Israel's international relations. When establishing and implementing Zionist and Israeli foreign policy, 7 components arose: creating and sustaining a Jewish territory with a significant Jewish population, developing a viable economy, finding and retraining major power political support, evolving a never again syndrome. That is, that Jews would never again find themselves unable to defend themselves. Evolving a defense policy to offset the asymmetry of Israel's demographic inferiority and geographically small size as compared to the surrounding hostile Arab population, assuring access to water and fossil and other fuels sufficient to sustain the well-being of the state. seeking accommodations with neighbors when available and neutralizing regional existential threats. Next is Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is also known as East Timor, and it is located in Southeast Asia, occupying the eastern portion of the largest and easternmost island in the Lesser Sunda Islands, which they share with Indonesia. The country is divided into 13 municipalities, with the capital and the largest city is Dili. The nation has a population of 1.2 million people in 2015. Their spoken languages are Techuma and Portuguese, both officials, Indonesian and English. Economic policies. In summary, of the 2011 National Development Plan, it aimed to reduce poverty in every district in Timor-Leste, promote fair and just economic growth, and provide a good quality of education, health, and life for every citizen. Major economic policies to achieve inclusive and high economic growth rate. Front-loading for infrastructure and human capital development, transparency of public financial management and petroleum fund, tax reform to provide incentive for private sector investment, SME development, establishment of central bank and a public commercial bank, loans for infrastructure, cheap money, PPP for airports and seaport, social assistance program. Fiscal policy. Timor-Leste's fiscal policy has a plan that should be followed to enhance the regulation and productivity of spending, to mobilize domestic revenue, and to contribute to the security of the petroleum fund's properties. Moreover, these are the fiscal policy based on the National Development Plan 2011. Foreign policy. Timor-Leste's foreign policy places a high emphasis on its relations with Indonesia and Australia, its closest neighbors, as well as its other neighbors in the region. Timor-Leste also puts a high emphasis on its relations with friendly countries and donors, especially the member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations ASEAN, the Community of Portuguese Language Countries CPOP. Last country on our list is Singapore. Kind of government. Singapore's unicameral parliament PAL, along with the President of Singapore, make up the country's legislative body, a unitary state with a republican form of government. Known as a unitary parliamentary republic, is one in which the people have faith in and vested political authority in the parliament. Economic policies. Export-focused, free market economic policies that encourage bilateral flows of trade and investment have long been favored by Singapore. Singapore is located directly along a major shipping route. These steps have enabled this little country to become one of the most successful global open commerce and investment regimes. Economic policy is to foster the creation of national wealth through sustainable and stable economic growth, based on the free market system. Major economic policies: open trade and investment environment, corruption-free pro-business regulatory framework, political stability, public investment in infrastructure, high savings and prudent fiscal management, trained labor forces, significant tax concessions to foreign investors. Fiscal policy. The fiscal policy of Singapore aims to promote shared accountability at all societal levels. In order to jointly create a better Singapore, it strives to promote, enable, and magnify the initiatives, ideas, and efforts of the business and human sectors. The following is what Singapore's fiscal policy framework hopes to accomplish: ensure financial discipline, pursue growth, redistribute with minimal distortions, manage reserves as an endowment. Foreign policy. This perspective guides Singapore's foreign policy, which seeks to preserve cordial connections with other nations, particularly Malaysia, Indonesia, and ASEAN, while also making sure that its actions do not exacerbate those of its neighbors. Some fundamental principles of Singapore's foreign policy are: as a small state. Singapore has no illusions about the state of our region or the world. Singapore must always maintain a credible and deterrent military defense as the fundamental underpinning for an effective foreign policy. Singapore must promote and work for good relations with our immediate neighbors in all spheres. Singapore will support and be active in international organizations such as the United Nations UN,